This episode of the Upland Social is brought to you by Hunt Ready and Gun Dog Central. You're listening to the Upland Social, a podcast dedicated to the bird hunting community. I'm your host, Ryan Linton, an artist, writer, and lover of all things dogs and birds. We'll gear up and hit the field with some of the most engaging and compelling voices on the bird hunting scene. Each week, we will hear from seasoned hunters, dog trainers, storytellers, wild game specialists, to everyday uplanders just like you and me. Their insights, experience, and stories will inspire and equip you to explore, conserve, and celebrate the wild places we all love. The landscape is truly limitless. So load up, drop the tailgate, and let's go. This is the Upland Social. Jim Burris is a passionate outdoorsman who recently relocated from North Carolina to Wisconsin. He's hunted with bird dogs for over 25 years, going back to his time grouse hunting in the Appalachian hills of West Virginia and with his Ryman English Setter. Currently, he has a pudelpointer named Manu that he travels the country with, hunting any upland game bird they can find. He is a lover and collector of rare upland hunting literature and fine shotguns. Jim is the founder and chairman for the Bird Dog Society, a nonprofit dedicated to providing education, outreach, and events to bird dog owners to support an enriched and healthy lifestyle for their dogs. Professionally, Jim is the director of a large aquaculture research center studying the physiological processes of fish. If there is anything that can top Jim's passion for upland hunting, it would be his passion for fishing, but it's a close competition for his time. Jim, it's great to have you today with us on the Upland Social.
Thanks, Ryan. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for thinking of me when it comes to the mythical snipe.
Yes, the mythical snipe for sure. We're definitely going to get into that, and that's definitely what kind of from afar kind of got me connected to you, and knowing you as the snipe and rail guy. So we'll definitely hop into that. But yeah, I know we covered quite a bit there in the bio, Jim. But tell us just a little bit more about yourself and. You don't have to give specifics, but just kind of like where you're located at in the country, and just anything else that you want to offer, just about information about yourself.
Yeah. So right now I'm located in South Central Wisconsin. I'm a fish biologist by trade. Fishing was my passion growing up. I played every sport imaginable, and I would come home from football or basketball or baseball practice and grab a fishing rod and go fish in the middle of the night, and was a professional bass fisherman for a little while, a fly fishing guide, ran my own guide service, and I've traveled all around the world fishing. But then I'm a avid outdoorsman. Anything to do in the outdoors, I'm going to be doing it, and so that's kind of where the upland bird hunting came into play. My cousin had an English pointer whenever I was younger, and my first exposure to bird dogs was following that pointer around in the Appalachian woods and listening to that bell ring. And English pointers have a big motor on them, and I was just amazed at watching that dog run through the woods. And we were able to find a grouse and harvest the grouse that day, so I was able to see everything come full circle. So from that point, it was something I always thought I would get into, but, I was still pretty young at that age. And then it wasn't long after I got out of college, I got my first own bird dog, a Ryman English Setter, from a field trial guy in North Carolina, actually. And kind of the rest is history, so to speak.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. I love that. And had on a fisheries biologist, a retired fisheries biologist, several episodes ago. We were just talking about some of the overlap that we even see with upland bird habitat and fish habitat as well. So have you noticed anything like that since your time of working with, I don't know if the fisheries is technically what you do, but just aquaculture and anything that maybe you've noticed in kind of the overlap in the ecosystem of those two, what is kind of two very different things in our minds that we like to kind of segment from each other. But have you seen anything like that?
Yeah, well, in my profession, I study fish on a cellular level, so it's a little bit different than doing kind of fisheries work. Um, but one thing about it back in West Virginia is a lot of the foresting that is going on back there is kind of a hot topic with native brook trout and kind of the habitat that is being created for, rough grouse, is not always great for brook trout the first, 1 to 3 years after the timbering, but after that, it's beneficial. But there is kind of some regulations and stuff as far as culverts and timbering and stuff like that. Kind of you sometimes see a kind of interplay between um, that. I a lot of people have kind of come up to a stream and it hasn't rained in 3 weeks, but the stream is solid mud, and oftentimes you find some kind of construction operation further upstream that's contributing to it. And,
Sure.
so those are always kind of considerations. So creating habitat for one, kind of does impact the other. And long term, there's often benefits, but, sometimes short term, the impacts can be pretty significant. And so I think that those are places where the two kind of sectors, sometimes collide or have interactions that kind of have to be worked out for the betterment of the fish and the grouse and wildlife and gold wing warblers and all those kind of good
Oh, yeah.
indicator
Yeah.
species.
Yeah, so I definitely wasn't planning on talking about that, but that's really interesting. What's one way a workaround for that, like where everything, maybe not everything wins. Maybe that's a little too um, much of an aspiration, but like where there's at least like a healthy compromise between all that stuff. Maybe that you can speak to.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a forester, but I know that there's buffer zones that have to be between kind of where the edge of the cut is starts and where the watershed is at.
Okay,
So you kind of get some of that. You don't get as much sedimentation and runoff into the streams. And then there's certain regulations for what streams. So they're oftentimes the streams are kind of tiered into different tiers. Some being this stream supports wild reproducing population of trout. This stream is only hatchery introduced trout, and it kind of the scaling system. And this kind of I'm sure varies from state to state, but the scaling system kind of depends on the type of requirements that the loggers have to do as far as their permits.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah, super interesting. It's yeah, how just like you said, the interplay and kind of how all that um one thing can affect another, without us realizing it. So that's yeah, that's really, really intriguing. Well yeah, so tell us Jim about your dog. Is it Manu? Is that how you say it?
yeah, Manu.
Manu. So he's a poodle pointer, you said. I really don't know a whole lot about that breed. I mean, I've definitely heard it come up many times, but I really couldn't say anything that I know about them. So tell us all about Manu and just kind of your guys's, your adventures and what you guys do together.
Yeah, so Manu is he's 5.5 right now. He's about 84 pounds at the moment, but a few of those pounds will come off during hunting season.
Hmm.
His normal running weight in hunting season is probably about 76 to 77 pounds. He's a slick coat poodle pointer, and when I got him, I was in North Carolina, so I kind of wanted that slick coat for ease of maintenance and to kind of help stay cool in the summertime. And now that I'm in Wisconsin, I'm sure there's days where he wish he had a little bit of a woolly coat on,
Sure.
but yeah, he's pretty well mannered and doesn't mind the cold. So yeah, we've been kind of getting after it up here in Wisconsin. We've been out on days where the wind chills uh -30 or better, and we just have to minimize our exposure. But we're pretty much out there every day. And so I wake up, my day starts at 5 o'clock every day, and I grab him and we go out to usually some kind of public land or, private land or, some kind of sportsman's club that I'm a member to. And, we do a little bit of training, do some exercising and do some scouting. And kind of that's, one way we find a lot of our locations is, just, when I'm shed hunting, I'm also looking for, deer properties to hunt, woodcock properties, grouse. When I'm grouse hunting, I'm also looking for trout streams and deer hunting locations and everything else. And when you're kind of involved with a little bit, you kind of absorb everything and all the information into kind of one pool and be like, hey, I could exploit this property for deer hunting or woodcock hunting and whatnot. So Manu's with me on all those adventures. And so he gets exposed to quite a bit of stuff, some good, some not so good, like porcupines and snakes and stuff like that. But yeah, we hunt mainly upland birds, but anything that he can point and we can legally shoot, we're probably going to hunt for it. In North Carolina, we had woodcock and grouse and quail there. But where I lived at,
Mhm.
I had to drive um, about an hour and a half to get to any decent quail cover, and about 2 hours to get to any decent grouse cover. And so woodcock season's 45 days long, and it seems like it comes and goes in a flash. And so getting him on birds in North Carolina is a challenge. And
Mhm.
here in Wisconsin, it's a little bit easier. But then you never know when Mother Nature is going to come in with a cold bite of snow and
Sure.
temperatures to kind of shut your season down a little bit. And so we try to get after it pretty hard. We like to do a lot of shed hunting as well. So as soon as bird season's closed, we're usually out tromping the woods for looking for shed antlers. Uh,
Cool.
so yeah,
Yeah, yeah, it's kind of going back to the weather in Wisconsin and, the distances that you have to travel in North Carolina. It's kind of a catch-22 between those 2 because it's like, well, would you rather risk maybe getting shut down early in the in the North Country for your season, or quail and grouse season, they go in a lot of times in those Appalachian states, well into February, and so you may have longer to hunt, but the bird densities are nowhere near, obviously what they are in Wisconsin, Minnesota, or Michigan. So it's interesting. You've got all those experiences, and yeah. So tell us about Manu just a little bit more. I mean, what is the hunting style of a poodle pointer? And you go out in the CRP, the woods, whatever. I mean, I'm sure all that's probably a little bit different, in some nuance, but generally, like what is the hunting style of a poodle pointer?
yeah. So a poodle pointer is a cross between was developed with a English pointer and a German water poodle, and German water poodles are now extinct, but obviously they have a strong point from the English pointer side of things. Um, he 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 does he does like to track, whereas a lot of times setters are kind of they lock up on that first scent, oftentimes. So you do have tracking ones, but setters and pointers are often times considered your specialist, and um, but poodle pointers are really good at tracking. They have kind of that harsh wire type coat, so they're really good on harsh conditions and in water. They
Mhm.
absolutely love water, and that's one reason why I kind of went with a poodle pointer. My English setter, and I'm not going to say this about all English setters, but my English setter hated the water and didn't like to retrieve. And then, we've got to spend a lot of quality time together on the tailgate after hunts, picking out furs and ticks and briars and everything else. And so that kind of the wiry, harsh coat is kind of something I was purposely looking for.
Yeah.
Um, and I wanted a versatile dog. I'm kind of a jack of all trades and a master of none type of person. And so I wanted a versatile dog that can, hunt just about everything and have adventures with out in the woods. And, when he finds a bone in the woods, whether it's an antler or a deer leg, he gets excited and I get excited. And when we find a bird, it's even more. So,
Reliable equipment driving inspiration. That's been the heartbeat behind Hunt Ready Vest Systems since 2017. Hunt Ready was born out of one simple idea: Upland gear should enable your hunt, not get in the way. Too often, hunters are limited by equipment that doesn't meet the demands of long days in the field. That's why Hunt Ready builds gear around 3 core principles: modularity, so you can customize your setup to fit your style; configurability, allowing adjustments for all-day comfort; and durability, with rugged, modern materials built to go the distance. Whether you're slogging through cattails for roosters, scurrying up mountainsides for grouse, or busting brush for bobwhites, Hunt Ready is committed to providing long-lasting USA-made gear that doesn't quit. Your next reliable bird vest is within reach. Head over to huntready.com. That's hunt, REDI.com. Yeah, you're talking about your setter having an aversion to water, and I don't know if I would say my Brit has a strong aversion to water. I mean, she'll definitely go through it, but it took me back to this memory several years ago. She only had to have been maybe a year and a half old, and we come up over this like irrigation ditch, and a couple wood ducks take off out of it, and she barreled down in there, and I didn't even see her. I just hear, and I said, about as quick as she got in, she got out. She did not realize like what she was getting herself into. So I wish I could have been in her head in that moment. And they're definitely all different in that way. But yeah. So on the topic of water, and I feel like kind of like a big meat and potato section of our conversation here. I have to imagine that Manu, having a German water poodle heritage inside of him, he takes to water real easily, and hunts water birds pretty darn well, specifically with these snipe and rails. And so, yeah, so I've done it, a fair bit of times here in Indiana. It's, as you and I both know, it's a pretty, at least from what I've gathered, a pretty unknown territory still, and a lot of there's not a lot of participation, at least on my end of things. Here in Indiana, where people are going out and pursuing them. So, yeah, man, anything and everything you want to tell us about snipe hunting? I guess first of all that they are real, but second of all, just anything else that you want to offer on that too.
Yeah, well, I love hunting snipe. And I get the myth thing, or are they? I didn't know they were real type of thing all the time, and I actually got one today whenever I told him I was doing this. And it's a guy from Florida. I was like, "Yeah, I'm sure you've seen probably hundreds of snipe. You just didn't know what they
Yeah.
were."
Oh yeah.
But sniper kind of have a very wide distribution. I found them, obviously in North Carolina, and they migrate down the coast. And in the wintertime, you'll find them from North Carolina all the way down to Central America.
Hmm.
But even going further west, in the Dakotas and Oregon and Washington, I mean, they're pretty much across the country, Wisconsin. Um,
Hmm.
and so, it is a bird that is often overlooked, but it's, got a very wide distribution. And, um, I'm a person that tries to take advantage of opportunity. So I'm constantly looking at habitat. And whenever I'm traveling around, exploring or hunting, I'm constantly looking at habitat. Oh, that's good woodcock habitat, or that's good, snipe habitat, or that's good quail habitat. And, obviously you got to be exposed to those birds to understand what good habitat is for each of those birds. And that's where, I'm a big component of getting out before and after the season. And that's when you put boots on the ground exploring. You're
Yeah.
not out there to kill birds at that point. So if you find anything, that's just icing on the cake for next season. And, or if it's preseason, for that season. And that's kind of how I stumbled onto snipe is, I was, scouting some ground for woodcock, and, we were walking next to a waterfowl impoundment, and Manu, being the way he is, was just soft meandering around, and next thing I know, he's on point, and so I head over there in his direction, and, lo and behold, here comes a snipe flying at my head.
Hmm.
And, I saw the beak and saw the bird, and I was like, "Well, that wasn't a woodcock," and I was like, "What in the world was that?" And I thought about it for a few seconds, and I was like, "Well, that had to have been a snipe." And, at that point, season for snipe was already in North Carolina. It's one of the earliest, bird seasons to come in, that along with rail. And, I was like, "Well, I guess we'll be back here tomorrow with a shotgun," and that's exactly what we did. And, we went out there and we were able to harvest our first snipe, literally on our first hunt where we were targeting them.
Cool.
Turns out all the waterfowl impoundments in that area, had snipe on it that year. It was actually a really good year for them. And yeah, that's when the light bulb really started to go off. Because over the course of the next few weeks, we went out there 2 or 3 times a week, um, in our kind of our morning, um, walks and in the evenings. And we found snipe pretty much every time. And, there was a few days where the conditions weren't quite right as far as the wind, and, we really couldn't get that close to them, and they would bust and couldn't get a shot. But, once I started to get it dialed in, we were able to go out and consistently find birds, and oftentimes in a couple hours we could put up, most of the time 30 or 40 birds. But there were
Mhm.
some days that, we would get up to 150, 200 birds and,
Wow.
3 or 4 hours of hunting. And a lot of those birds are pointed. And then if you have a dog that's steady through wing shot fall, a lot of times the birds will kind of popcorn flush, and so the Manu will go on point, and you go up to flush a bird, and that bird will get up. You shoot at that bird, and when you shoot at that bird, another bird gets up. You shoot at that bird, and if you miss both, then you're reloading, and another bird's getting up, and then you
Mhm.
reload, and you shoot at another bird as you're walking in. And it's just kind of, you can heat up a barrel pretty quick. And so that's where steadiness from a dog comes into play.
Sure.
Um, and these birds don't tolerate a ton of pressure, and so they actually do a really great job of teaching dog manners.
Mhm.
And you kind of have to pick and choose your weather conditions. You kind of want a stiff wind, stiff sustained wind. Gusty wind oftentimes can give you some trouble just because it kind of changes directions and swirls and stuff like that. But if you got a good stiff sustained wind, 10 to 15, where the dog can get a good scent on it from a distance, that it's pretty easy to hunt them with a pointing dog if you get the right conditions. Now, I would say you have to get kind of choosy or do some scouting on the right kind of places to hunt them with a dog. If you got a place that's, knee deep in mud, it's gonna be hard for you and the dog, so you kinda need that firm bottom. Waterfowl impoundments oftentimes have food plots, corn and millet and stuff like that in there that the birds will get into, and a lot of different grasses. A lot of
Mhm.
your coastal grasses, are really good for the birds, and oftentimes, it's essentially stuff that, you might think of as quail habitat that's just been flooded, is a good place to go.
Okay.
And yeah, you're primarily looking for water that's 4 feet, or excuse me, 4 inches or shallower. Because these birds just kind of wade through the water. They like
Mhm.
sometimes I'll say that they like to have their feet wet, but not their bellies. And so you're kind of wading through, and these birds will kind of be in small, loose groups often. Sometimes you'll find them a lot in singles, but oftentimes they're in small, loose groups. So when you find one, you oftentimes you'll kind of find a small pocket of them, and when they come out, when they flush, I often say they're half the size of a woodcock and twice as fast. And or, my buddy Nick Adair from GIY, he likes to refer to them as a soggy dove, because they're in the water and fly about like a
Yeah.
dove. But they come out pretty fast, and oftentimes they'll kind of do a big loop around. And even if you miss them, a lot of times you can follow where they go. And if you got good visibility, oftentimes you can kind of see roundabouts where they land, and you can get on them again a second time. But each time you get on them after that, they spook a little bit earlier and a little bit
Mhm.
earlier. So you got about 2 times, and then it's just really hard to get on them. Um, but yeah, when they're migrating through in North Carolina, they stick there, pretty much all winter long. So when season comes in end of October, stays until the end of February, and most of the time the birds start showing up about beginning of November there. But they're there pretty much all winter. But from year to year, the density, can fluctuate. Some years, kind of really get good numbers where you can put up 100 or 200 in a day, and other years, maybe 10 to 15 might be good for, a couple weeks. Then all of a sudden you get, some weather patterns that pushes some more in. And they do go kind of north and south as the weather dictates in the winter.
Mm.
But they're pretty consistent. Um, and you have a good rotation of places you can find them, and start to find a few, then you can really do a lot of e-scouting and kind of pick up a lot of places. Well, if I find them here, I should be able to find them there, and if they're there, then they should be here. And you
Mhm.
start to build a portfolio, and the more places you go and the more places you find them, then you kind of have a good rotation. The thing of it is a lot of these flooded areas that can change year to year on how much water is in that habitat. So you kind of have to go back and check them each year, because if you have a really wet season, places that you were finding them before may be too wet for them. And maybe you find a few sporadic rail in there, but Other years, if it's particularly dry, there may not be any snipe in the fields where you found them
Mm,
before. So they do move around quite a bit. A lot of times up here in like in Wisconsin and I know over in the Dakotas and stuff where you got a lot of that flat agricultural land and short grass prairies and stuff. You can find them, kind of just about in any shallow flooded field or standing, field that has standing water in them.
mhm.
I've actually found them out in pretty decent numbers out in the national grasslands out in South Dakota, just in a kind of an old lake bed that had dried up and turned into
Yeah.
vegetation. And then we got a good rain and it had few inches of water on it. And that was about it. And, we were there a few days before and there were no snipe. And, a few days later after we got the rain, there was a bunch of snipe in there. So, sometimes it doesn't take a long to move in, but they can offer some pretty good shooting if you're a good shot. Usually 8 bird limit. That's a federal regulation. 107-day season per year. I think some states it's actually shorter than that just because of kind of weather. Um, but but yeah, a lot of opportunity there, and I think that they're a phenomenal primer to get you ready for all the other bird seasons that are to come, and they certainly humble your shooting. And so, by the time you start hunting other birds, if you can hit the snipe on the wing, a grouse is a piece of cake as long as you don't shoot a tree. So
Yeah. Jim, you should offer an online class for snipe hunting. I mean, there's a lot of rich, valuable information that's in there. You sure gave us a whole lot, and so a couple things I wanna dive into. Um, and so I guess just like correct me if I'm wrong on this, but like you said you were talking about the 4 inches of water. I think for me, at least I've only hunted them in Indiana. Um, my experience too has been like that, where it's like shallow water, maybe even just kind of around puddles,
yeah.
in low spots in a field. I think they like a little bit of vegetation. It's not
Mhm.
just like necessarily wide open mud flats that you're going to find them on. Um, even though I think probably at times, they can be out there because I'm sure they like to be able to see too. But it seems like sometimes a little bit of coverage is nice. Um, and and then in the food source kind of things, you're talking about the corn, the grain, and the millet. Are they eating on those things, or are they primarily like digging and eating invertebrates, kind of like what woodcock do like when they probe into the soil for earthworms, or what's kind of like their main food source? So yeah, so I guess just maybe just dig a little deeper on like specific habitat types. If a person were to go out and search and scout for snipe, what's maybe like these 3 things they're looking for, and then maybe like moist soil units, or something like that. We're obviously not talking like duck hunting, like where it's like completely submerged vegetation. It's a little more on the shallower side than that. So maybe kind of riff on just those 2 things for a little bit.
Yeah, so I have found them quite a bit out in completely wide open mud flats.
Okay.
Those birds are really hard to get onto.
Yeah.
And if that is a situation that that there's birds out there or something like that, that's kind of where you want that 20 or 30 mile an hour wind. Because the dog
Okay.
can still point them. Um, but they, kind of need a bigger working distance to get on those birds. And sometimes those birds are getting up right at the edge of shotgun range.
Hmm.
But yeah, it is possible, but that's just not ideal conditions, if you're hunting with a dog. Vegetation, does make them feel more secure. There's thicker big vegetation you can find them in. Typically the tighter they will hold.
Hmm.
And once you, oftentimes when you're going from location to location, there may be pockets of deeper water or thicker vegetation. If you can kind of get some thicker vegetation and deeper water, oftentimes that's where you find your rail. Um,
Hmm.
Whereas snipe are kind of in that shallower fringe. Now you can find them around like deep water lakes and stuff like that, but they're just right on the edges, where you got emergent vegetation coming up. Um, and so some of these lakes in the southeast, they kind of have a very slow um, gradient towards the shoreline and have a lot of emergent vegetation around the edges, and that's certainly a place you can find some snipe. And they do primarily eat worms. but they have a little
If
bit more of a varied diet than woodcock, and so they'll eat insect larvae and small crustaceans and stuff like that as well. Um, and so they're kind of in the food plots and stuff for the waterfowl, just kind of for that flooded habitat and to kind of early season, warm weather, the mosquitoes can be quite bad in some of these locations. And so actually wearing, a long sleeve shirt and a hood and stuff like that can help combat a little bit of that.
Mhm.
And oftentimes in early season, that's when I'll actually just put on a comfortable pair of shoes and wet wade in there. Once the weather gets cold, then I got, rubber boots on or hip waders, because you are kind of in that water, all the time.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a lot of good, valuable information. And on a comical side of things, you're talking about mud and making sure that you're not going to get stuck out in knee to waist deep mud. I have found myself in that situation, not really sure if I'm going to make it back to the back to shore. And so, obviously I did, but yeah, you definitely want to be mindful of that, and kind of figure out a way to kind of test that, especially in early season when all that stuff is, nowhere near, it's just a lot more loose and, um, a lot easier to maybe sink in and kind of get yourself in a bit of a situation. So that's a good point to make. And you're right. I mean, they are very much like a woodcock. In my head, it's like the snipe is the more athletic kind of trim of the two. And if and the woodcock's a little bit more of a bulky, kind of more rotund in body shape, but, very much like similar, like in beak size, though, I think, as far as the length of their beak and kind of the same feeding method, so they're definitely cousins, in that regard, at least.
Yeah, and one easy way to kinda tell them apart is, not only from the size, but, one easy way is the stripes on the head. On a woodcock go left to right, on a snipe, they go front to back. So that's
Okay.
one easy way to tell them apart, so
Yeah, yeah, and a lot of times snipe will get up and they'll make that kind of that squawking noise too, as they take off. Um, and I've noticed that too, what you're saying about how they'll kind of make a circle. So they're almost like a cottontail rabbit in that way, and then a soggy dove, like you said that Nick was saying too. So, yeah, they definitely borrow some traits from other animals. It seems like, but yeah. So let's kind of like do a part two here. Let's talk about rails a little bit. I have to think there's quite a few people out there, and I think that even in the bird hunting realm, that probably they couldn't even tell you what a rail is necessarily. There's a lot of different types of rails all over the world. We have a few of them here in North America. I have my only experience with hunting soras, and that's the only ones that we can hunt in the state of Indiana. I have seen a Virginia rail one time. But yes, what maybe differs, from a snipe and a rail hunt, even though you can definitely accomplish those two on the same walk. It is a little bit different, I think. And yeah, I would just like to hear about just, your experiences with hunting those as well.
yeah, and so what species of rail you get will kind of depend on what state you're in. You do have your 2 bigger rails, which are your, king rail and your clapper rails. And those are gonna be a little bit more hugging the coastline. You can find them a few hours inland, from the coast, but, you're probably not gonna find one of those in, Minnesota or Wisconsin or the Dakotas or
Mhm.
anything like that. If you do, you probably aren't gonna identify it correctly, in time to
Sure.
shoot it. In fact, and there's not even a season for those in, most of those Midwestern states. But yeah, the clappers and the kings, hug the coast a lot more. The soras and the Virginias have a wider distribution inland, and the abundance of them can kind of vary, significantly year to year. Some years you get a lot of soras, some years you get a lot of Virginias. And they're not really strong flyers, so I think a lot of that may depend on some weather patterns during migration. But your soars and your Virginias are going to be your 2 smaller rails. And rails as a group, are shorebirds, just like woodcock and snipe, and so they kinda have
Mhm.
long legs. They do have longer beaks, but not quite to the extent of snipe and woodcock as far as, proportion to body size. The king rails and the clapper rails have longer beaks than the Virginias and the soars are particularly long. But you do have some different colorations in the plumage, when you have juveniles versus adults as well. And, and one thing that I find with the rails is, they tend to be in thicker vegetation because a lot of times they are, grabbing a hold of the vegetation with their legs, and kind of, shifting through the vegetation looking for those crustaceans and insect larvae and stuff like that.
Hmm.
Um, and and so you can find those in deeper water, but there you're really kind of more concentrating on that thicker, growth where, you typically would not find snipe. Oftentimes, when you're snipe hunting, what you're really focused on is a little bit different than what you would find your rails in. Um, the rails, they don't really group up. They tend to be, individuals. You may find, some several of them in an area, but they're not kind of defined in a group. They're just kind of,
Hmm.
evenly distributed throughout. They are weak flyers. They're not really a challenge to hit. And so one way I'd like to describe it is when they get up off the flush, it almost looks like a plane that's weighted down too much and has trouble getting off the runway. Their legs are hanging
Yes.
down. It's like there's, got lead bracelets or an anchor on them. And so they're not much of a challenge there. But the one nice thing about rails is they do hold really well for dogs. And part of it is because they rely on being in that thick vegetation and cover. A lot of times bird watchers actually have a hard time seeing them,
Hmm.
um, and finding them because of that aspect. But, because they're in that thick cover, they hold really well for dogs. Um, and they're kind of also the same as woodcock and snipe, and they're a red meat bird. Being a migratory bird, their breast meat's really red, and you can kind of put the meat of a rail and woodcock and snipe kind of all in the same bowl, and, if you didn't see a difference in the size, you probably wouldn't notice a difference in the taste, that much, either, so.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Going back to the hunting of rails, have you had any experience? It, I feel like I've had this experience a lot with rails like running on me, just like pheasants will. Or maybe it's they're holding so tight that my dog is having trouble among many of the other factors of just the time of year and just maybe the way that the scent is being distributed through the cover and that kind of stuff. I mean, she'll definitely point them. She'll definitely get birdie, and I can feel like she's tracking, or whatever. But it just seems like I'll see a rail sit down, we'll hightail it over there, and it's like we just can't get on it. Is what at least my most recent rail hunting endeavors have been like. Does that sound right, or do you think they're holding so tight? Because I know you just said they hold really well and produce good dog work. What would you say to that?
Well, I mean, it's hard to say with any type of certainty, but a few things that kinda come to mind, with that is, um if they just land and you go over there quickly, they're probably still wind washed, and so it may take a little bit of time if you don't, if you get over there too quickly for a kind of scent to build up to get a good kind of scent cone for the dog.
Mhm.
But also they're, with some of these birds, they do have oils on their feathers and stuff, and if you think about it, how oil interacts with water, sometimes that scent can kind of get dispersed over a larger area, and depending on water currents and stuff, you can get that scent in places that you might not expect it to be.
Mhm.
Or, the bird had been there for a while, but because it had, been feeding in an area for maybe hours beforehand, that oil still is lingering on the water, especially if it's a very stagnant water source.
Mhm.
So those are a few things. And then, kind of the thick vegetation, chlorophyll's a natural deodorizer. And so that, can kind of contribute to, maybe it takes a little bit longer for that scent cone to develop, for your dog to kind of get on it. So even though the bird's there, just to kind of it may take yeah, scenting conditions could be a little bit confusing, or it may take a while just to get that good
Mhm.
scent cone. And that's partly why getting a good I like getting a good stiff breeze on these birds. I don't think that they um, smell any less than any other bird, but you also factor in size and all these other conditions, and
Sure.
uh, yeah. And on good windy days, good sustained wind, a good dog could pick up these birds from 40, 50, 60 yards away, on a point.
Hmm.
So one thing about them too is if a dog doesn't point and you can't produce a bird, just keep walking. Just follow the nose further and further out, because oftentimes
Hmm.
the bird may be, kind of on you might be between the dog and the bird. So that's something to kinda keep in mind too. If, it seems like the dog's confused, he might be confused because 'cause you're not finding the bird, but they may know it's there.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, so, yeah, because 'cause I've definitely done that a lot where, whenever I first started hunting them on windy days, Manu would point, and a lot of times I would give up on the point, be like, "Oh, there might have been a bird there, but there's not one there now." And I'll release Manu, and he may go up 20 yards and go back on point, and then I'll find a bird, or, I may release Manu, and, I turn around and start walking, and there goes a bird, that was 15 yards further down, than where I was, kind of trying to flush a bird. So,
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's all really good, helpful information. And chlorophyll, I had no idea that that was, a natural deodorizer. So, it's interesting all those things that are at play while you're out there that you don't realize that are happening. That I'm sure you're day to day you're involved in probably a lot more science than most people are thinking about those kind of things. But all that stuff definitely whether it's chlorophyll, whether it's wind, whether it's wind washing, and all that stuff really plays into the dog being able to locate, or maybe being able to point the bird from 60 yards away, like you're saying. And it's pretty incredible how that stuff kind of plays into that. This episode is brought to you by Gun Dog Central, the place to connect hunting dogs with real hunting homes. Whether you're looking to purchase or sell your pup, Gun Dog Central makes it easy. Nearly 20 years ago, founder and owner Jeff Davis created Gun Dog Central to help breeders and hunters connect through a centralized online platform. You can even find hunting articles, recipes, and online forums to further your knowledge of the bird hunting lifestyle. From pointers, retrievers, flushers, hounds, and even horses, Gun Dog Central makes it a breeze to find what you're looking for. If you're ready to buy, sell, or simply connect with the Gun Dog community, visit gundogcentral.com, your trusted source for hunting dogs and more. Do you have a favorite way that you like to cook them? I know that you said that if you put them all in the bowl and if they were to be the same size, a woodcock, a snipe, a rail, um, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference much. But and I believe that too. They're all red meat birds because they migrate so much and they use their breast meat, breast muscles a lot to perform that migration. What's maybe a way or two that you really like to prepare them?
well, predominantly, kind of the rails that I've gotten have been Virginias and Soras, because the kings and clappers are more on the coast. Oftentimes, they're in brackish water,
Hmm.
around oyster beds and mussel beds and stuff like that, which, kind of make it difficult or impossible to hunt with the dog because they're tough on feet. And so, as far as dog work on rails, kind of Soras and your Virginias are going to be your main two species there. And those being smaller birds, I tend to just mix them with my woodcock and snipe. And if I don't shoot them up too bad, I put them in a freezer and freeze them whole and just freeze them together. And then, and when I'm ready to eat them is when I'll clean them. And when they're semi-frozen, I'll just oftentimes just breast them out. Soras and Virginias basically don't have any leg meat to speak of. So for
Right.
them, you just breast those out. Woodcock, I'll save the legs separate if I breast those out, but sometimes I'll pluck the woodcock. But the snipe and rails, oftentimes I just breast those out. And my favorite way to fix them is just kind of get a seasoning that you prefer and flash fry them in a skillet with some, your preferred oil and good olive oil or some butter. Maybe 30-35 seconds on a good hot skillet on each side, because when you flame out, it almost looks like a, teeny tiny steak.
Hmm.
And so, 30-35 seconds on each side, flip them over, and you still want them pink, at the very least in the middle. You can eat them, still pretty red in the middle, and phenomenal eating. I like to eat them just right out of the skillet. And most time I'm sitting there
Yeah.
at the skillet with a fork, and so when I flip them over, the next flip is in my mouth. So,
Yeah.
uh, yeah.
Yeah, I like that, yeah. I always think with, these red meat birds, whether it's snipe rail, woodcock, prairie chicken, sharp tails, they really don't need much. You know,
I mean,
it's really simplicity is your friend. You know, some oil, some butter in a pan, cook them medium rare, like you would a steak. And I like to, you know, maybe throw a little A1 steak sauce with it. And I think you're golden. You know, it seems like with pheasant, quail, ruffed grouse, there's a lot more. I mean, you can do a lot of different things with the red meat birds, but I think they yield themselves, um, or they lend themselves. That's what I was meant to say. They lend themselves the best, just to kind of that simplicity like that, in my opinion. And then you can do, you know, with the white meat birds, you can do a lot of things, just like fried chicken fingers. You can do chicken and dumplings. You can do a pot pie. I mean, you name it. I mean, it's kind of the sky's the limit with that. So I'm
yeah,
sure there's folks out there that would probably, you know, push back on that a little bit, you know, of like, oh no, they're great in fajitas and you need to cook them all the way through and all, you know, it's to each their own. But that's kind of how I've been operating, you know, since I've started all this.
yeah. One thing I was going to say, one of my favorite recipes to do is to kind of chunk them up in even smaller pieces, and then you get them well done. And so the meat is going to kind of firm up a lot as you kind of cook it more.
Okay.
But as long as you cube it up small, it makes phenomenal. Put a little bit of taco seasoning in there and make tacos with them. That's
Okay.
something I really like to do. Yeah.
Yeah. I saw somebody on socials a couple years ago. They were this was prairie grouse. They were making yeah, it was burrito tacos is what it was. That's what it was. And I need to reach out to that person and get that. My wife loves burrito tacos, so maybe you could give that a try. That's pretty cool, man. So all right, Jim, let's shift gears here a little bit. You know, we covered you know, these birds that I definitely wanted to hop into and kind of do a deep dive and hopefully have encouraged you know, some folks to grab the dog and a shotgun and maybe head out September, October, you know, or even into December. You know, I'll find snipe here even in December. Um, what let's shift gears and talk about the Bird Dog Society. Um what sparked kind of the desire to launch this organization, and just tell me all about it, man. I know we teased it a little bit there in the intro, but what is the Bird Dog Society?
Yeah, so the Bird Dog Society, we're a nonprofit, and we are established to kind of promote the physical and mental well-being of bird dogs through providing education, outreach, and events for bird dog owners. And basically, you know, kind of in a nutshell, you and I live what I would call the bird dog lifestyle. You know, we're eating up with it. We're constantly active with our dogs. We're hunting with them. We're doing something with them. And a lot of people get dogs because they like the looks or they like certain things about them without really fully understanding what they're getting into. And it was surprising to me whenever so when I had my setter and she passed away from old age, you know, I wasn't really involved with dog events and organized, you know, kind of training and stuff like that with her. But when I got my poodle pointer, you know, they're very heavy to NAVDA and testing in the NAVDA system. And so I started going to a lot of training days and doing group trainings and, you know, started doing more group hunts and stuff like that. And the more I kind of got connected into the bird dog community, the more I saw a lot of people getting these dogs that never hunted before. And the dog, you know, just needed some kind of mental and physical outlet, whether it's hunting or, you know, shed hunting or dock diving or lure coursing or just some kind of job to do. And a lot of times these people would be kind of struggling with, you know, a young puppy that's less than a year old and be like, you know, I don't know what I'm going to do. You know, he eats a sofa a week or, you know, my husband got this dog and now I'm stuck at home with him all day or, you know, vice versa. Or you know, spouse got this dog as a running mate, but, you know, she, you know, is traveling for work and, I don't hunt. But it, you know, it just seemed like a lot of people had this desire to kind of connect more with their dog, but didn't really know where to begin. And, you know, in today's society where, you know, a lot of people are like, you know, I need a mentor or something like that. It's hard for people to kind of have the time to mentor someone younger or someone with a dog. And a lot of people just kind of go to social media. And when you go to social media, it could be very intimidating. You know, you see these people, you know, going out and shooting up all kinds of birds and doing all these adventurous, you know, hikes in the Grand Canyon with their dog and stuff. And most people was like, I mean, I can't imagine doing that with my dog. He would jump off the Grand Canyon, and so we wanted to provide education and events that kind of helped people be comfortable doing events with their dogs and being educated on how to be prepared if something did go wrong, or to know what to expect when they take their dog traveling for the first time, or
Mhm.
what happens when your dog gets in a trap unmistakably, whether you're hunting or not. If you're just out hiking and your dog gets a trap, these are hunting dogs. They're gonna be out kind of if they're not on a leash, they're gonna be out looking for any kind of critter or you're just nosing around and, it's, just preparing people to how to live the bird dog lifestyle so that their dogs are safe, but they're active and engaged and they're not an overweight, couch potato that, is just watching the flush on TV, and that's the extent of their bird hunting. We wanted
Yeah.
people to build that bond with their dogs. One stat that kind of I always, bring up and that, I was shocked whenever I did the research is there's 300, and this, I stopped counting at 365. There's 365 plus nonprofits in the US alone for rehoming surrendered bird dogs. But,
Hmm.
there was not a single nonprofit that I knew, that really tried to get at the root cause of is there a need for that many nonprofits? Why are all these people giving up their bird dogs?
Hmm.
And it's a lot of times, people getting a visual because, they saw one on TV and, they thought it would work well in their one-bedroom apartment. We saw a lot of this with COVID. And I always, some people kind of their emotion is, that person didn't know what they're getting into or they get mad at the person. I always had the emotion where I felt bad for the dog. The dog, did not have a choice in the matter. And,
Right.
the saddest thing for me is when I see one of those overweight labs, not to pick on lab people, but, there's a lot of overweight labs out there. And every time I saw something like that, it just, kind of, it bothers me. you know?
Mhm.
I just wanted an organization that could be advocate for dogs. And part of that is, resources for dogs, safe resources, getting rid of abandoned barbed wire on hunting grounds and abandoned wells. And, you got,
Hmm.
you pull into a place to go hunt and you look over and there's, broken glass bottles all over the place and just, kind of, and that's where, having people, across the country, they can have an impact in their regional location, to help their dogs, but also help their friends' dogs and people traveling and stuff like that, so.
Yeah. Man, I love that. Like, I did not realize kind of the entirety of the bird dog society and kind of your heart behind launching that. And I love that. Had no idea that there's 365 plus. What is that again? You said 365 plus
Nonprofits dedicated to
nonprofits.
rehoming bird dogs, and so,
Okay.
a lot of times what you
Yeah.
get is these nonprofits are specific to a breed, and so you'll get a nonprofit that's specific for rehoming English setters, and then you have one specific for rehoming Irish setters, and then you have one specific for rehoming Gordon setters, and so that's kinda where it all stacks up because you get these pure breeds, and they're extremely intelligent, have high prey drive,
Hmm.
high physical demand, in order to keep them healthy. And so a lot of times people kind of create organizations because they have a passion for that particular breed,
Hmm.
and they want to try to place those dogs with a family that understands the breed. So.
Yeah, 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 and you make a really good point too about like you saying your heart goes out to the dog. I love that, and it's a lot of times we probably don't think about it that way, and how the dog, like you said, is just kind of caught in the middle of it, maybe of an impulsive decision to buy an animal, and you don't maybe do the research that you should do, and now, like you said, you're in a one bedroom apartment with a German short hair or whatever that just it's not their fault. Like we have bred these dogs to be this way, and I tell people about I'll bring my Brittany here to work sometimes. We have the luxury of being able to bring our animals to work, at least to a degree. And I don't know if I could bring it every day, but like I tell people if you're just looking for just a good house dog, like don't get a Brittany, and I don't know if you should get any bird dog, really, or at least there's a good percentage of them that are probably not the dog for you because they just require a certain amount of stimulation. Like these are working breeds that are just, they're full of these genetics over hundreds of years of breeding, that just need to be, they don't know any different, and they need to be exercised, and they can't help but want to express those genetics, and so if you are wanting just simply a good dog, a good family dog, there's plenty of other breeds out there that are able to acclimate just to that, maybe more, I don't know if sedentary is the word, but just like that kind of more low key lifestyle. That if you don't take it out for a few days, like they're not, tearing stuff out of the trash, or tearing up the couch or whatever. And my dog's not. She's not really like that, other than she loves to chew holes in all of our blankets. Every single blanket we have in the house has holes in it, but it's her one toxic trait, I guess, as I should say. But yeah, I mean, and you make a good point too about like these people get these bird dogs and they know that they want to go hunting with them, and or just go have these experiences with them, but they really don't know the starting point. And it's I hadn't thought about that a whole lot, but it is pretty intimidating to like be like, okay, so I got a bird dog and I'm gonna like look at social media and see what other people are doing, and they're had these epic photos on North Dakota sunset, or a tailgate full of roosters or whatever, and you're just like, man, I don't know the first thing about that. And I think it's just so easy to forget that there's plenty of people that almost kind of feel like they're on the outside looking in, and so I'm thankful for organizations such as the Bird Dog Society, that's helping to pull that barrier down a little bit. So I think that's really cool, man. And yeah, I appreciate you, you know, launching this and making it known in the world, man. It's a really cool thing, that's for
Well,
sure.
thank you. I appreciate that.
Um, what's so Jim, what is, since launching the Bird Dog Society, which has been going since when?
We're in our third year. We
Okay.
launched fall of 2021, but really kind of 2022 is when it really kind of kicked off.
Yeah. Since launching, Jim, what's maybe like a really cool moment that you've got to experience with the Bird Dog Society, of whether it was with a dog, or maybe a first time hunter, just something that like really you can point back to as like a powerful moment since launching this.
Um, well, when we do these events, people, some of these events include dogs, and some don't, depending on kind of what the itinerary is. And the things that are most powerful to me to be like, all right, this was all worth it, and we need to keep going, is when we hear from the participants of these events afterwards, and we get positive feedback. And I remember a few, our biggest event that we do each year is called the St. Hubert's Trial in South Carolina. And it's kind of just a more of a social event, very low key type loose field trial. And St. Hubert's Trial is where we have judges, and we're judging you and your dog as a hunting unit, not your dog specifically. And so, it's a kind of a conservation minded type hunt as well, where the judges will be asking you regulation questions, or and stuff like that. But it's meant to be kind of a very low entry bar, and a lot of times we get people to participate in that, and then we get feedback afterwards where it may be someone that is a professional hunter, and they have a guide dog, and they've never done a dog event before in their life, and this is their first ever dog event with a dog that hunts literally every day.
Mhm.
And it kind of opens our world to new possibilities, when hunting season's closed. And I remember one feedback we got where a lady brought her dog who was preparing for NAVDA test, and she brought her dog to one of our events, and it was the first event she had ever done with a dog. Um, and she was very nervous about bringing her dog around other dogs and being around other people, and just didn't know kind of what to expect and how accepting people would be of her and her dog. And she came to our event and just had a blast. Her dog had a blast, and she went and did her natural ability test like the very next weekend. And she said
Cool.
going to our event prior to just gave her so much more confidence to go out in public with her dog, and she was so much more comfortable. And her dog got a perfect score in the natural ability test. And
Oh,
so
that's
getting
awesome, man.
feedback from people like that really kind of it's kind of the purpose. We're there, and when people enforce that we are doing our mission, and then that's kind of it for me. But on a personal note, another kind of full circle part is when we did a event called Troubles with Bird Dogs at Old Hemlock Foundation. So I don't know how familiar you are. George Bird Evans, that's his home place in West Virginia, and Troubles with Bird Dogs is one of his books. And so we did an event there where we actually had George Bird Evans's vet there, and he talked about trauma training and injuries with bird dogs and how to manage them, and we were there talking about trapping, getting your dogs out of traps, and how to deal with porcupines and snakes and skunks and stuff. And
Yeah.
we had a full house there, and then part of that was going over and spending some time in George and Kay's house, Old Hemlock, and being someone who has a personal connection with George, that was really kind of special to bring that full circle and kind of see all those people that love bird dogs and love bird hunting, kind of at Old Hemlock. That was a pretty cool event for me. So
Yeah, that's super cool. Yeah, something that we the network that I'm in with the other guys that I'm with, we're called the Hunting Effect Network, is what this podcast is a part of, and something that is kind of like our slogan or our tagline is that hunting brings people together, and I think that's what you're also doing with the Bird Dog Society. You're helping bring people together, helping inject them, if you will, with confidence. Hopefully, just like that story with that lady that you shared. And it's just taking, like I said before, it's bringing that barrier down and realizing that, like, hey, you can successfully go out on your own with your dog, and have these really rewarding positive interactions out in the field with it. Whether you like to hunt, hike with it, just take it on a fishing trip or whatever. Like, you can have these really the moments that you dream of, like, they are possible, and you can be a bird dog owner. And so I think, man, I'm just appreciative that there's people like you out there, man, that they love it and they love the space and they're helping making it better, and appreciate all that Bird Dog Society is doing. So Jim, as we're coming to a close here, I know that you also love literature, and I do too. My guess is that you're probably more entrenched in old classic literature than I am. But man, just give me a book, whether you're in the process of reading it, or just one that you maybe kind of keep coming back to, over the years. Just something, or just a really cool find that you had, maybe at an old thrift store or something like that. Um, what type of bird hunting book has really, really spoken to you a lot?
well, just kind of where I grew up and everything. A lot of the George Bird Evans books really speak to me. Um, Yeah, and I think one of the last books I've been able to have the fortunate time to read has been Grouse on the Mountain. And in that, George Bird Evans, he's really great about setting up the book and painting a picture of the types of cover. And Grouse on the Mountain is about Chestnut Ridge, which is a ridge that runs from southwestern PA into north central West Virginia, and that's actually the ridge I grew up hunting and fishing.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
but he was very passionate about that. That's where George grew up as well, and so when he talked about a lot of those stories, I hunted in the same places he talked about. So like
Hmm.
the image in my head is so vivid to where there's specific trees and rocks that they're in his story. Sometimes I know exactly what tree he was standing by when he shot this grouse
Yeah.
or had this moment. And so those are always very kind of personal to me. But one of the other, kind of, what I guess to go back in another part here, one of the coolest things I like to do is find books that are signed to another author from an author,
Okay.
or has some kind of personal touch to them. For example, I've got a book signed from Burton Spiller to Philip Babcock, and both well-known authors at the time. But just to know that both of those well-known writers, had that book in their hand and was signing it to each other, and
Mm,
be, hey, check
yeah.
out my book. And I don't have the matching book, but I just imagine Philip Babcock was like, hey, here's a copy of my book, and sends
Yeah.
it to George Spiller or Burton Spiller.
That's
Um,
cool.
and then just, kind of the books that, most of my books are first edition signed copies. And so a lot of them I don't even read because they won't stand up to that wear and tear. But just those books that kind of have that personal story behind them is something I really enjoy.
Yeah, no, that's really cool, and, yeah, going back to the first thing you were talking about with George Bird Evans, and just to stand in those places and touch that tree that he's talking about, I'm sure that was a pretty powerful imagery, and then, yeah, like, on the kind of the personalization like you were talking about with whether they're signed by the author or signed from an author to another author, we were up in a bookstore in Indianapolis, and, I we went in there for my wife. Um, there was a really small outdoor section, and I was just like, "Well, I'll just pass some time while she's checking out her things," and the first thing I pulled up was, like, um, I think it was, like, hunting with hawks, like, doing aviary kinda stuff, or avian stuff, and I was like, "Okay, that's cool," and then it just was, like, this succession of, like I kept looking, and it was, like, a woodcock book, and then I found a rough grouse book by Frank Woolner. It's just called Grouse and Grouse Hunting is what it's called. And so I picked that up, and it was a lot of these books were not in my price range, but this one was. And I was like, okay, cool. I may check this out. And then I'm flipping through the pages, and whoever had it before me, they stuck a red phased rough grouse feather in there, as like a bookmark. And I was like, not only fighting back tears in the moment because I was just like, it was just a powerful moment for me, but also I was like, there's no way I cannot get this book now.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so I love those little like kind of where it's just got a little bit more fingerprints on it, if you will. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, there's two authors when you told me that story, Nick Cecily, who wrote Grouse Magic, and Mark Jeffrey Volk. They both had a habit of actually taking a tail feather from a grouse that they killed, putting it in their books, and then writing a message of when and where they killed that grouse. And so, you could
Mm,
use that grouse as a marker, but that's something I do all the time is using a tail feather as a marker. But
yeah,
yeah, it
love
just
that.
adds a personal touch to it, especially if you can match the location and date of when they killed that grouse to, story in the book.
Yeah, that's super cool. That's super cool. Well, Jim, we're winding things down here, and I've really appreciated your time and taking some time to join us on the Upland Social today. Is there anywhere you want to point folks to when it comes to just like the website for the Bird Dog Society, or just your personal page or anything like that that you'd like to, if people wanted to get connected with you, where they could find you at?
Yeah, absolutely. If people want to learn about the Bird Dog Society, they can go to our website, birddogssociety.org. We also have Facebook and Instagram as well, birddogssociety.org. If they want to follow me and adventures of Manu, they can check us out at Bird Dogs and Fly Rods on Instagram. And then, yeah, and we kind of we used to post a lot, and right now with the new job and location, I don't get as much time to do as many adventurous things, but yeah, it's been fun talking to you, Ryan, and you're doing a bang up job with this podcast, and I'm looking forward to kind of seeing where it goes, and yeah, I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thanks, man. No, I definitely appreciate that, the kind words and all that information that you just gave too. I'll definitely put that in the show notes as well. So, Jim, got one more question for you. What keeps bringing you back to the uplands?
Well, I so right now my life is pretty fast paced. New job, new city, um, and a 3-year-old at home. Which, kind of, you don't get much rest. And, hunting in the uplands, it really just kind of slows life down a little bit, and you kind of get in that quiet space where you kind of have a little bit of peace. It's kind of like fly fishing. It's one of those things where you go upland bird hunting or fly fishing. It doesn't matter if you catch a fish or you kill a bird. Sure, those things make it a little bit more fun, but you're kind of there to mentally and physically recharge and just kind of let the world just kind of melt away while you're out there. And that's what keeps bringing me back. And I mean that I think that's the draw for the whole outdoors. And then one thing with hunting with dogs is just it adds a whole nother element to watch a dog with its tongue hanging out and just happy and full of life. And it just uh it's infectious. You start to feel better. and it's just the whole kind of combination of a day of an upland hunt. With the having a overexcited dog at the beginning and a tired dog at the end. That's the ultimate goal, and then you're both happy. So
Yeah. Beautiful. Super well said. We're just going to leave it at that. Jim, thanks so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it, man. It was a ton of fun.
Oh yeah, appreciate it. Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you for listening to The Upland Social, an extension of the Hunting Effect Podcast Network. Recording and editing of this podcast, plus intro and outro music, was performed by me, Ryan Linton. My aim is that through this episode, you are more equipped and inspired to explore, conserve, and celebrate the upland hunting lifestyle and the beautiful places it takes us. Until next time, whether it's right here or out in the field, we'll talk soon.